so excited. Today is a new bright day, and it is the first day of my new season, season 4, The Courage to Create. I'm Dr. Gina Anderson. I am a learning scientist, an educator, an author, and I am a lifelong believer in the power of human potential. We all know that innovation rarely begins with perfect conditions, and more often it begins with curiosity, learning, and the courage to take the first step. Neuroscience actually shows that when we embrace new experiences and challenge ourselves to learn, the brain forms new neural pathways and it strengthens our capacity for creativity, growth, and problem solving. Every small step forward literally shapes the brain, turning possibilities into progress. This season is a tribute to my grandpa, Fred. Fred is actually one of our mascots, one of Nugget's friends, where the inspiration came from. And it's to every person this season is dedicated to who has ever started something with nothing more than an idea. So today, it just made the most absolute sense to have my very first guest of this season that's so personally meaningful to me as our co-founder, Dr. Scott Anderson, who actually has his Ph.D. in engineering and has assumed the role of the Chief Technology Officer at Luma. But many people don't realize that Scott started Remsense, which then spun into Luma Brighter Learning. And so I wanted him to be our first guest because innovation doesn't happen overnight. And it really just happens to ordinary people who just want to make a difference. So thank you so much, Scott, for being our first guest on this new season. I'm so glad that you wanted to join me and celebrate this amazing opportunity to talk about having the courage to create. So why don't we just start off and just give everyone an introduction to yourself, tell them what you created and where it started from and what the courage to create actually means to you.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me. And by the way, congratulations on starting season 4 of this podcast. I know you've done a lot of work on it. You've had a lot of really great guests, and I'm honored to be a part of it. But I think it's going to be a great season. So thanks for having me. My name's Scott Anderson. And as Gina said, I got a doctorate in engineering. I started out in engineering, and I've done a lot of work kind of in the Department of Defense sort of contracts. And shortly after I got my doctorate, I started Remsense, which was a remote sensing company at the time. And, it was basically a one-man show back then. And I started, I went out and got some contracts and, I wrote a lot of proposals. I ended up winning like maybe one contract, but it was just so hard. And then you and I started talking and we came up with the idea of Luma together and we pivoted. And so that's kind of, and then it's been a lot of journey. It's been a long journey of pivoting and just stepping back and innovating and thinking about what's possible, what needs to happen. And it's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a point in time when we lived in South Bend, Indiana. And one day we were at, I think it was it might have been an Office Depot. I'm not really sure, but you went and bought a popcorn can. It was around Christmas time. And I'm like, why are you buying that popcorn can? I was like, we're not going to eat that. I mean, I have gluten and dairy allergies. I'm not really sure. I was like, are you hungry? And you're like, no, I'm building missiles or something in the basement.
No, it was a radar.
A radar, whatever you were building. It's like, what is going on? So where do you think curiosity comes from to create these ideas, and why is it so important to innovation?
That's a great question. I feel like curiosity when I look at. So I kind of break it down into two different things in my own mind. It's like there's like consuming and then there's creating. And you have to do both, right? And you think of it like in terms of food and nutrition, you have to eat in order to move. and live and do work. And it's the same with knowledge, and it's the same with being creative. You have to like learn, you have to consume knowledge, you have to like consume wisdom of others, in order to like come up with ideas and be creative and things like that. I've always loved to kind of create and think of new ideas. And I think, when I take a step back and look at kind of the progress of kind of like how my work has evolved from one thing to another, it's always come down to this idea of like creating my own ideas. Like when I remember very distinctly, in high school, there were a lot of people I looked up to, like community leaders, church leaders, that just had this ability to kind of get up and speak about these ideas that were really inspiring. And to me, that was just this idea of like, embracing these ideas that are meaningful and like help progress, help move people forward. And when I got into engineering, at some point I wanted to follow that, right? And then when I got into engineering, I recall feeling a little sad that I was getting into engineering and kind of away from that.
Right.
Well, when I got into it, honestly, I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, this really scratches that itch of like creating content, creating these ideas that really could like move things forward. Because it's like the focus is never on like myself and internally. The focus is always like in service to the ideas that we have. And I think that that's the most beautiful part about like being creative and innovating. It's just thinking about those ideas and kind of moving forward. But
I love that. That's
yeah.
so cool. That's so cool. I love that people are joining us today. Thank you so much for saying hi and stopping by. This is beautiful information, and this idea of creating. And you can be you don't have to have a PhD. I mean, I think the fact that both of you and I have further education is because I think from my standpoint, I was always interested in the brain. Like I'm just kind of geeky that way. And you were always interested in technology and engineering.
Exactly.
And so you just want to learn. It's just like craving to continue to learn and helping others and coming up ideas and thinking about it. So if someone listening today is thinking and maybe they have an idea, like I'm going to have Randy Elm on my podcast in a few weeks. It's like he's had this burning idea. Like if you're sitting there and you have an idea or a dream, but they're afraid to take the next step, what would you say to them? Like what led you to take the first step? Because it's just an interesting thing to think about, like taking that first step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is actually a really deep subject, because I think that, first of all, that you brought up like this fear of taking the first step. And, when you say that, I think of anxiety, right? And I think of like, when I think of anxiety, I think of like Maslow's hierarchy. And, you only have so much energy. And so like if you're focused on something that brings you anxiety, that's where your energy is going to be. It's going to be like, okay, surviving, like how am I going to get through this day? How am I going to get to the next day? How am I going to get through this meeting? Versus like if you can free yourself from that anxiety, that's when you can start really, creating and like build that creative energy. I think that I think it's just about taking that first step. A journey. When you think about like the journey we've had over the years, I mean, it's been thousands of steps, just one step at a time. And it's a matter of, if you have a dream, if you have something, if you have an idea or create a vision, it's just like, just take the first step, even if it's small.
Should I tell everyone what my first step was, Scott? Should I tell them that I was selling all your books when you were in school?
Yep.
I'm kind of like not knowing what I want to do. I think I'm going to start trying to make some money.
Start a business.
Yeah. It's like before I think Amazon got the idea from me because I was selling your books, but the funny thing is people were buying engineering books.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's people like engineering.
I know. No kidding. I love that. What do you think? so this season, you're the first episode. What do you hope listeners take away from the conversations that we have about the courage to create? Maybe the conversations that we're going to have are going to be about courage. They're going to be about creativity. They're going to be about innovation, and they're going to be about ultimately mental wellness, right? So what do you hope listeners take away from these important conversations we're going to have in season 4?
Yeah, I feel like the world would be a better place if everybody could really embrace their creative energy. I had this thought the other day, that, energy flows, not to get too out there, but energy flows to where you have your attention. And, if there's something internally that you're focused on, I mean, that's where your energy is going. And whether you know it or not, when you're out in the world, you're actually, that's where your energy is going. You're actually asking other people to spend their attention and their energy onto what's inside of you. So in a way, it's like you're taking that energy in, versus like, if you have a focus, if you're in service to something kind of outside of yourself, that's where your attention goes, and you're actually giving back to the world. And I think, like, if everybody kind of had that mentality, and just like, if they have a dream that's kind of out there, and they just like work at it, and they work at creating that, then I feel like the world would be a lot better place. Everybody would be doing it. I think, like everybody's, mental situation would be better. I think it would just be a healthier place, and the world would be better.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people don't see themselves in this light, like they could be an innovator, but like you're saying, just the energy you give off, if you're focused on something negative, it's like you're putting that out into the universe, instead of spreading sunshine, right? And like giving good, like, whatever is like in your heart to do that, I think really helps. So I know when I started my career, you start a career typically is how your parents see you or think that you should be. And, I think about like, well, you're just that. You're just a teacher. I started out as a special education teacher. You're just a teacher, or you're just a mechanic, or you're just a technician, or you just deliver garbage, or whatever it is. It's like a negative connotation, but it's like, what if the approach is, you're a teacher? Like, think of all what you can do, and you can dream. And I know Barbara on her podcast, she brings on innovators in teaching, and like, you can be an innovator. Do you believe that every single person can innovate in some way? And what would you tell someone listening? Like, maybe it's a technician. We just had Technician Appreciation Day, which should be all the time, that they can innovate.
Yeah, I think everybody can innovate. Everybody can create. It's like this idea of well, okay, let's just put it this way. I think that you don't have to convince the world of anything. You don't, if you're a technician, if you're a teacher, you're president of the United States, you're whoever, you don't need to really convince the world that you're good enough. You don't need to be afraid of the outcome of what you're doing, because especially when you kind of reframe your dream as like, this is my thing. It doesn't become about me. It doesn't become about people's rejection of what I'm doing. It becomes about the thing that you're working on. And I think that that thing can be anything. It could be playing guitar. It could be writing a book. It could be poetry. It could be writing social media in a way that changes people. It could be, building a product. It could be really anything, and it's just like, that's what kind of touches our passion. That's what makes us unique, and us a part of something bigger.
I love that we're going to be out at, I wish I had the address in front of me. If Jill or Alyssa are listening, they could post the address. But speaking of doing something creative and helping others, Wednesday, July 1st, Scott, myself, I think maybe Bill Kondo from our team, I think might be coming, and Jill are going to be out at a Love's location. And thank you, Love's, for giving us the opportunity to be there to spread appreciation and goodness to drivers. And to your point, we had a vision of giving drivers appreciation of what they do every day and saying, look, thank you for your courage to do what you do. You've been nuggeted and we appreciate you, and you inspire us every day. And we're going to be giving out at least 25 nuggets and a lot of sunshine at that Love's location. So I love that you brought that up, that it's about, and like people are going to, who knows, it doesn't matter what people say or people do. That's what we want to do, just show our appreciation for others. Let me ask you this. So one thing, I think about is creating something better. Like, what does creating something better look like to you? Like, whether it's culturally, personally, professionally, like, what does that mean? Like, if we're going to create something better?
I think it really, in my mind, because it's all subjective, what I think is better and what you think is better. I mean, I kind of feel like, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, that's good, but I think I go back to this idea of like internal versus external. If you are in service to yourself, that's okay. But like being in service to something other than yourself, that's bigger than yourself, I think that is this idea of actually making the world better. It's like, how do you want to leave the world, when you're gone? You want to be able to say that you've expended energy and given the world resources that it didn't have before you.
Absolutely. Okay, Alyssa's putting the address where we're going to be, everybody. Here is the address dropped on Wednesday. We are going to be at this location in Charlotte, North Carolina. I actually thought we were going to be in South Carolina. So I think Alyssa might need to check her address there. But in any case, we'll be posting it, and we will be out at a Love's location on July 1st. But in the meantime, I do want to say this. I really do believe that small acts of creativity and curiosity really do improve. Last season was all about random acts of small moments that change our lives. And this season is really about curiosity and creativity. So how can small bits of curiosity and creativity improve our daily lives, maybe our relationships and our overall well-being?
Yeah, I think it comes back to like, consuming content, consuming learning in order to actually create something. So it's just the small bits of information that we get, the small steps we take, it gets us into the direction of kind of where, what our vision is and where we want to go with our vision.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that it really sticks with me, people talk about wanting to belong. And when you think about belonging, really it springs from love. And one of the things that you're mentioning and talking about is this idea of outward energy and giving love. And I think that's powerful. So next week, my guest is going to be GK Gaines, and we saw him at a conference not too long ago, and we asked him to come on our podcast. He is a two-time founder and CEO of Tensor Planet, and he's going to come be with us next week. What do you think we should ask him, Scott?
Well, I know he's really into AI and he does a lot of consulting with AI. So I would love to hear from him, like how he would think someone should feel comfortable creating in this new age of AI.
And also, too, I'm going to be speaking in a few weeks on this idea of how people play into that, right? Because people ultimately have a role and will always be part of the solution. So it'll be great to talk to him. All right, Scott, as we leave today in the first episode of season 4, what little bit of curiosity or creativity do you want to put in people's pocket to move throughout the week? And then let us know where the people can find you and connect with you.
Yeah, I would say just, don't be afraid to think outside of the box. And, no matter what you do, like throughout the rest of the week, just, take a breath and give yourself grace. And then try to get rid of that anxiety that kind of probably doesn't mean anything anyway. And just, feel free to think freely. But yeah, you can find me at LinkedIn. That's probably the only place I am these days.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you for creating Remsense. Thank you for having the courage, and I appreciate you being here and coming on my first podcast of the season. And let's keep growing Luma.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.